What is Azure Stack? As importantly, let's answer the question, why Azure Stack and why Azure Stack to power the Umbrella Cloud? So to do this, let's take a quick step back and look at a traditional infrastructure deployment that we see day to day with our customers, and also just tackle some of the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis as they go on their cloud journey. So a traditional data center deployment, it's likely that right now you're consuming either infrastructure services from your own data center, running either an open source hypervisor or enterprise hypervisor like VMware, and playing around and having a look at the power of the public cloud. Now, as part of that, what you'll have noticed is that there are some absolute synergies between both. At an infrastructure level or at a virtualization level, from a compute perspective, infrastructure as a service exists on your premises with your service provider and also available in the public cloud. But beyond that, really the synergies do start to stop, and you see the public cloud starting to take stride with the flexibility, scalability, and the innovation of services that exists with the likes of AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and Microsoft Azure, and trying to translate those back into your on-premises data center is really quite a challenge. Now, there are options out there, such things as Cloud Foundry, Pivotal. They're intelligent stacks that you can deploy up on top of on-premise infrastructure or service provider infrastructure that give you a level of platform as a service. But ultimately, what you end up with is a disconnect between your on-premises infrastructure or your service provider infrastructure and that of the public cloud in terms of how you can approach an automation, different APIs for managing those automations and those deployments, inconsistent deployments through those different technologies, different skill sets required to manage on-premises versus cloud and actually learn and deploy on-premises versus pure public cloud. But at the business level, the operational processes to go through to manage those different estates and the disaster recovery and business continuity planning required across those different estates can become really, really challenging. And the mantra of cloud has been to make things simpler for businesses, both commercially and through technology, and not to layer in those overheads. So really, there's a problem being created and a problem that we are going to address. And that is addressed through Azure Stack, and we'll cover that in a second. But let's take a quick look at the almost strategic approach to private clouds and public clouds from an on-premises perspective and a service that can be consumed from up in the cloud. So from a private cloud perspective, there are very, very mature estates, hypervised technologies, underlying infrastructure platforms that exist. And probably for the last 10 years now, an emerging array of services from AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft, Azure, and lately Alibaba Cloud that really have been changing the way that businesses can take opportunity of digital transformation, reduce the threats, but ultimately make strides of actually just running better businesses. And that's really come from and driven by the hyperscale cloud providers because they've taken it beyond the infrastructure. Intelligent APIs, cognitive learning, machine learning, data warehousing, business intelligence, all kind of things that aren't infrastructure, they're just services to be consumed. Now, the problem is this is very confusing for customers because actually when you look at your technology estate, all of the 101 business operation stuff still needs to be taken care of. So how do I manage my users, and is everything going to be secure, and how do I basically maintain the fundamental security of my data between my on-premises or service provider cloud and that of the hyperscalers? Consistent deployments, how do I make things operationally clean and quick and automated? Control across both areas, visibility across all of my clouds, making sure that my team and my IT operation has the right knowledge to succeed. But ultimately, I don't want vendor lock-in. I actually want to see consistent innovation. That's really, really important so you don't get left behind. But actually, it comes down to the brass tacks, total cost of ownership, and ROI. Very, very confusing, and Azure Stack addresses that. And we're going to go into how that is addressed right now. So Azure Stack. Azure as a Microsoft platform up in the public cloud has existed for over 10 years now, and fundamentally is now based on Windows Server 2016 nano server technologies with storage spaces direct and software defined networking. And Microsoft have extended all of that into the data center. So from their own data center into yours, into service providers' data centers, which gives consistency of the underlying infrastructure. And consistency of the underlying infrastructure gives consistency of the services that can run on top of it. And Azure Stack, on top of those technologies, delivers consistent language through PowerShell. For developers, a consistent experience with Visual Studio. A endpoint in Azure Resource Manager that is consistent across Azure Stack and public Azure. Now that's fundamental for one main reason, and that is that templated deployments of applications and services can be built once and deployed to either a on-premises or service provider Azure Stack and also into Azure Public. So consistency right at the core of everything that's written. Rich fabric integration and consistent portals between both the public cloud and on-premises Azure. So we're starting really to answer some of these questions of consistency and consistency of approach between local and public cloud and cloud services. Now, one thing that's not mentioned here is identity. And Azure Stack and Azure are based around Azure AD, user management, which means consistent user management and security profiling across both clouds. Now that is key because it starts to bring in the security elements and reducing business risk around data management and auditing. Now, Azure Stack as a service provider to you in the Umbrella data center still serves up the same services as Microsoft Azure in these three formats. So infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and microservices through the service fabric, allowing your applications to be deployed in their current fashion from a traditional infrastructure perspective through virtual machines, but also allowing your runway to consume platform services through different resource providers and ultimately extend to cloud native applications over time. So really giving you a runway for today and allowing you to extend over time without needing to inflict drastic change on your application architecture. Now, from a deployment perspective, Azure Stack is a write once and deploy anywhere approach, which means from a consistency perspective, there is no necessarily difference between how you would construct an application in country, in New Zealand through the Umbrella Cloud powered by Azure Stack, or to deploying it in any one of the many locations of the Azure Public Cloud, of which there are over 30 right now, with the closest one to New Zealand being Australia East. So you can see now that the initial concerns or problems that were created by having a difference of approach between your on-premises cloud services and public cloud services are now starting to be really bridged. And this really is the nucleus of the Umbrella hybrid platform strategy to drive consistent innovation from a service provider and a hyperscale cloud perspective, but also have one place to go to build, consume, view, and manage your cloud estate, and ultimately answering some of the really fundamental business questions that exist today, and business problems that exist today of, I want consistent identity management across my platforms. Security is fundamental, and Azure Stack addresses that. Consistent deployments between Azure Stack in country and that of the public cloud in Microsoft Azure. Single control across both. One platform to learn. And ultimately, a consistent total cost of ownership between where I run my workloads. Now, for more information on Azure Stack and how it can be beneficial to your business, come and visit us at umbrella.com. We'll be happy to speak to you.